Below is an abridged timeline of events established in the group of television shows and feature films set in the Star Trek universe. Many dates are estimates as the various shows and films are not consistent in their use of dates. More exhaustive timelines are available in both Star Trek reference works and in various fan websites. Series and movie settings. This table shows each TV series and movie, its year of release or broadcast, the year it was set in according to the prevailing Okuda chronology and the star date range for that year. The designation Enterprise-based series are the series that featured the various incarnations of the starship USS Enterprise. In universe timeline chronological order: Star Trek Enterprise, Star Trek, the original series, Star Trek, the animated series, Star Trek, The Next Generation, and all 12 of the Star Trek feature films, including the two newest J.J. Abrams alternate reality films based on the original series. Timeline. This timeline is based on the Star Trek chronology model described below, supplemented by data from StarTrek.com. Note: many of these dates are rounded off approximations, as the dialogue from which they are derived often includes qualifiers such as over, more than, or less than. The BCs, the Big Bang. Quinn hides in the Big Bang to avoid discovery by Q. C. 6 billion years ago, the Guardian of Forever is formed. C. 4 billion years ago, a humanoid civilization seeds the oceans of many planets with genetic material, which would lead to the development of humanoids on many planets. C. 65 to 100 million years ago, the dinosaurs from the episode Distant Origin are most likely descendants of hadrosaurids who lived in the Cretaceous period of Earth's history. C. 1 million years ago, Sargon's people explore the galaxy and colonize various planets, possibly including Vulcan. C. 600,000 years ago, the Tkon Empire, an interstellar state consisting of dozens of star systems in the Alpha Quadrant, becomes extinct. C. 200,000 years ago, the Iconian civilization is destroyed. C. 8000 BCE, the Dominion may have been founded in the Gamma Quadrant by the shape-shifting race known as the Changelings around this time, possibly in a different form than is known in the modern timeline. C. 2700 BCE, a group of extraterrestrial beings landed on Earth and was eventually known as the Greek gods established in the episode, Who Mourns for Adonis? First millennium, c. 4th century, the Vulcan time of awakening. In the midst of horrific wars on Vulcan, the philosopher Surak leads his people, teaching them to embrace logic and suppress all emotion. The Dominion may have been founded in the Gamma Quadrant by the shape-shifting race known as the Changelings around this time. c. 9th century, Carlos the Unforgettable unites the Klingons by defeating the tyrant Muller in battle, and provides his people with teachings based on a philosophy of honor. Pre-20th century, c. 1570, the ancient Bajorans use solar sail ships to explore their star system, and at least one reaches Cardisha. 18th century, the Suliban homeworld becomes uninhabitable. The preservers transport various Native Americans to a faraway planet. c. 1864, the Skagerrans abduct humans for use as slaves in their colony world. c. 1871, the Cardassian Union is established. August 31, 1888, Jack the Ripper's first victim is found murdered and mutilated in East London. c. 1893, Time's Arrow. 20th century, 1930, the city on the edge of forever. 1937, several hundred humans are secretly abducted by aliens and brought to the Delta Quadrant. 6 are cryogenically frozen, including long-lost pilot Amelia Earhart. The 37s. 1944, Storm Front. 1947, 3 Ferengi crash land in the New Mexico desert, and are held by U.S. government at a secret base for scientific study. Little Green Men. 1957, a Vulcan scout ship visits Earth, according to a story told by T'Pol. Carbon Creek. 1967, Captain Braxton's 29th Century Federation timeship Eon crash lands on Earth. Future's End. 1968, Assignment, Earth. 1969, Tomorrow Is Yesterday, Moon Landing. May 30, 1971, Mariner 9 is launched on a mission to Mars. August 20, 1973, Viking 1 is launched on a mission to Mars. September 22, 1980, Midtown stabber kills his first victim in Buffalo, New York, United States. 1986, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. 1992, The Eugenics Wars begin. 1996, The Eugenics Wars end. Futures End. 1999, Voyager 6 is launched. 21st century, 2002, the interstellar probe Nomad is launched. 2004, the past events of Carpenter Street. 2009, the first successful Earth-Saturn probe takes place. 2012, the world's first self-sustaining civic environment, Millennium Gate, which became the model for the first habitat on Mars, completed in Portage Creek, Indiana. 2018, sleeper ships are made obsolete. 2024, the reunification of Ireland occurs, as the result of protracted use of violence as a political tool by pro-unification forces, the past events of past tense. 2032 Ares 4, a manned mission to Mars is launched. Sven Cochrane is born. 2037, the spaceship Charybdis makes an attempt to leave the Solar System. 2053, World War III ends and Earth is left devastated, mostly because of nuclear warfare. Scientific advancement continues, however. 2063, the past events of Star Trek, First Contact. Sven Cochrane makes the first human warp flight with the Phoenix. This attracts the Vulcans and they make first contact with humans. c. 2065, the SS Valiant is launched. 2067, the unmanned interstellar warp probe Friendship 1 is launched. 2069, the colony ship SS Conestoga is launched. It would found the Terra Nova colony. 2079, Earth begins to recover from its nuclear war. The recovery is aided and partially organized by a newly established political entity called the European Hegemony. 2088, T'Pol is born. 22nd century, 2103, Earth colonizes Mars. 2111, Jonathan Archer is born in upstate New York on Earth. 2119, Sven Cochrane, who now is residing on Alpha Centauri, sets off for parts unknown and disappears. Some thought he was testing a new engine. After an exhaustive search, it is believed that Cochrane has died. He becomes one of the most famous missing people in history. 2129, Oshi Sato is born. 2142, Warp 2 barrier broken by Commander Robinson in NX Alpha and Warp 2.5 achieved by Commander Archer in NX Beta. 2145, Warp 3 broken by Commander Duvall in NX Delta. 2150, keel laid for Enterprise. 2151 Euro 2155, the events of Star Trek, Enterprise take place. 2156 Euro 2160, the Earth-Romulan War is fought between United Earth and its allies, and the Romulan Star Empire. The war ends in a stalemate though the Romulans are defeated at the Battle of Cheron. The Romulan neutral zone is established. 2161, the United Federation of Planets is founded by Earth, Tela, Andoria, and Vulcan. 2165, Cirque, Federation diplomat and father of Spock, is born on Vulcan. 2160s to 2196, the Daedalus-class starship is active. 23rd century, 2222, Montgomery Scott is born in Scotland. 2227, Leonard McCoy is born in Georgia, North America on Earth. 2230, Spock, the son of Cirque and the human Amanda Grayson, is born on Vulcan. Hikaru Sula is born in San Francisco, North America on Earth. 2233, James T. Kirk is born in Riverside, Iowa on Earth. 2233, James T. Kirk is born aboard a shuttlecraft from the USS Kelvin. James T. Kirk's father, George Kirk, is killed. Nyota Ura is born in the United States of Africa. This fits with the alternate timeline. Unlike her alternate birth date of 2239, for the latter would suggest her only being 19 in the film. 2241, Pavel Chekhov, born in Russia on Earth. 2245 Euro 2250, the USS Enterprise, a Constitution-class vessel, is launched under the command of Robert April, on a 5-year mission of exploration. In the alternate timeline created by Nero's attack on the USS Kelvin, the Enterprise is still under construction in 2255 and is not launched on her maiden voyage until 2258. 2245, Pavel Chekhov is born to Russian parents. In the alternate timeline created by Nero's attack on the USS Kelvin, Chekhov is only 8 years younger than James T. Kirk, implying a birth date of 2241. 2250, after a refit, the USS Enterprise is launched on a second 5-year mission under Captain Christopher Pike. 2254, the events of The Cage. 2258, the events of Star Trek take place. Nero destroys the planet Vulcan killing billions, including Spock's mother as well as 38 40 Federation warships. The USS Enterprise is launched on her maiden voyage under Captain Christopher Pike. James T. Kirk becomes the ship's new captain shortly afterward. Henceforth, a different timeline is required. 2259, the events of Star Trek Into Darkness take place. 2260, Enterprise is launched on a historic 5-year mission. 2261 Euro 2264, the USS Enterprise undergoes a major refit, increasing its crew complement from 203 to 430. 2263, Boothby, groundskeeper and counselor at Starfleet Academy, is born. 2265 Euro 2270, James T. Kirk is captain of the Starship Enterprise on a historic 5-year mission. 2265, the events of Where No Man Has Gone Before. 2266 Euro 2269, the events of Star Trek, the original series take place. 2269 to 2270, the events of Star Trek, the animated series take place. 2270, the USS Enterprise returns from its 5-year mission under the command of Captain James T. Kirk and enters major refit while Kirk is promoted to Admiral at Starfleet Command. 2273, the events of Star Trek, the motion picture. 2273 Euro 2278, the upgraded USS Enterprise embarks on a 5-year mission under the command of Admiral James T. Kirk. 2279, around this time the USS Enterprise is retired from active duty and assigned as a training vessel in orbit of Earth. 2285, the events of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. The events of Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. The USS Enterprise is destroyed to prevent it from falling into Klingon hands. 2286, the events of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. The newly refit USS Yorktown is renamed the USS Enterprise and is launched on its maiden voyage. 2287, the events of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. 2293, the events of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. The Enterprise A is slated to be decommissioned shortly afterwards. The opening events of Star Trek Generations. The USS Enterprise is launched under the command of John Harriman. James Kirk is presumed killed. 24th century, 2305, Jean-Luc Picard is born in La Barre, France on Earth. 2311, The Tomed Incident. 2324, Beverly Howard is born in Copernicus City, Luna. 2332, Benjamin L. Sisko is born in New Orleans, Louisiana on Earth. 2333, Jean-Luc Picard becomes captain of the USS Stargazer. 2335, Geordie LaForge is born in the African Federation, Earth. William T. Riker is born in Valdez, Alaska on Earth. 2336, Deanna Troi is born on Ptazed. Catherine Janeway is born in Bloomington, Indiana on Earth. 2337, Tasha Yar is born in a failed Federation colony on Tucana 4. 2340, Worf, son of Mu, is born on the Klingon home world, Komnos. 2341, Julian Bashir is born. 2343, the Galaxy-class development project is officially given the green light by Starfleet Command. 2344, the Enterprise C, under the command of Captain Rachel Garrett, is destroyed defending a Klingon settlement on Narendra 3 under attack from Romulans. Due to the Enterprise Ka-Euros's sacrifice, a new era of more open communication begins between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, leading to a formalized alliance. 2346, Worf's parents are killed by Romulans in the Kaitama massacre. Worf is adopted by human parents. 2349, Annika Hansen is born in Tendara Colony, to Magnus and Erin Hansen. 2355, Magnus, Erin, and Annika Hansen are assimilated by the Borg while on a research mission in the Delta Quadrant. 2357, Worf is the first Klingon to enter Starfleet Academy. USS Galaxy, the prototype Galaxy class is launched. 2,363 United States dollars Enterprise, the third Galaxy-class starship is launched from the Utopia Planitia shipyards in Mars orbit, and becomes the Federation's new flagship. 2364 Euro 2370, the events of Star Trek, The Next Generation. 2367, the Borg assimilate Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Euro The Battle of Wolf 359 is fought 7.7 light-years from Earth in Sector 001. The battle results in the loss of 39 Starfleet vessels and over 11,000 lives. The Borg continue to Earth. Picard is rescued and the Borg cube is destroyed via the actions of the crew of the Enterprise D. 2369 Euro 2375, the events of Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. 2371, the events of Star Trek Generations. The USS Enterprise is destroyed. Euro The Star Drive section by a warp core breach. The saucer section containing the crew makes a forced landing on Viridian 3. The ship is subsequently declared a total loss. James T. Kirk reappears from the temporal continuum in which he had been since his disappearance in 2293. Kirk is killed on Viridian 3. 2371 Euro 2378, the events of Star Trek, Voyager. Caretaker the USS Voyager is stranded in the Delta Quadrant. 2372, Sovereign-class USS Enterprise launched under the command of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. 2373, the events of Star Trek, First Contact. 2373 Euro 2375, the Dominion War is fought. After devastating losses on both sides, the Dominion surrenders to the Federation. With the Klingon military in ruins, and the Cardassian Union shattered, the Federation and Romulan Empire emerge from the conflict as the only major powers with the influence to affect Alpha Quadrant politics. 2375, the events of Star Trek, Insurrection. Dialogue in this film and in the DS9 finale, What You Leave Behind placed the chronology of this film as during that episode, after the final battle of the war but before the treaty signing ceremony. Most notable in the film is Worf's ability to leave the station to join the Enterprise, as well as a line about Federation diplomats being involved in Dominion negotiations, and the Federation's willingness to work with the Sonar, who are established as a Dominion ally during the war. 2378, with the help of a future Admiral Janeway, the USS Voyager returns to the Alpha Quadrant. 2379, the events of Star Trek Nemesis, resulting in the death of Lieutenant Commander Data. 2387, the events narrated in Star Trek, when a supernova destroys Romulus, and Spock and Nero and his crew are sucked into a black hole. 26th century, c. 2540 to 2550, the starship Enterprise J is commissioned and takes part in the Battle of Procyon V against the Sphere Builders as shown in Enterprise episode Azati Prime. 29th century, temporal Cold War, first established in the pilot episode of Star Trek, Enterprise and recurring until the series' fourth season premiere, it is a struggle between those who would alter history to suit their own ends and those who would preserve the integrity of the original timeline. The Eon-type timeship is in active service during this century, as is the Wells-class timeship Relativity, 31st century, episodes with time traveler Daniels from Enterprise, Cold Front, Shockwave, Azati Prime. History of the chronology. There have been several efforts over the years to develop a chronology for the events depicted by the Star Trek television series and its spin-offs. This matter has been complicated by the continued additions to the Star Trek canon, and the scarcity of Gregorian calendar dates given in the show. Original series. There are few references setting the original series in an exact time frame, and those that exist are largely contradictory. In the episode, Tomorrow is Yesterday, a 1960s military officer says that he's going to lock Captain Kirk up for 200 years, to which a bemused Kirk says, that ought to be just about right. Likewise, in the episode Space Seed, it is said that the 1996 warlord Khan Nowanian Singh is from 2 centuries ago. Both these references place the show in the 22nd century. However, in the episode Miri, it is said that 1960 was around 300 years ago, pushing the show into the 23rd century. Finally, the episode The Squire of Gothos implied that the light cone of 19th century Earth has expanded to 900 light-years, which seems to set the show in the 28th century, since light would take 9 centuries to traverse that distance. According to notes in the making of Star Trek, the show is set in the 23rd century, and the Enterprise was supposed to be around 40 years old. Roddenberry says in this book that the star date system was invented to avoid pinning down the show precisely in time frame. Roddenberry's original pitch for the series dated it somewhere in the future. It could be 1995, or maybe even 2,995 inches. Early chronologies. The Star Trek Spaceflight Chronology and FASA, a publisher of the first licensed Star Trek role-playing game, chose to take the Space Seed figure, adding a few years to make sure the events of the original series were in the 23rd century. This dating system is followed by other spin-off works in the 1980s, including Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise. This timeline system gives the following dates. The sub-warp ship the UNSS Icarus makes first contact with Alpha Centauri in 2048, and there meets Zafram Cochrane, Sick, who has invented warp drive. The first Earth warp ship, the Bonaventure, makes its first voyage, to Tau Ceti, in 2059. The first contact with Vulcans is in 2065. The Federation is formed in 2087. The Romulan War occurs in the 2100s. First contact with the Klingon Empire in 2151. The first Constitution-class starship is launched in 2188. The USS Enterprise's 5-year mission under Captain Kirk lasts from 2207 to 2212. The events of Star Trek, the motion picture, occur in 2217. The events of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, occur around 2222. The events of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, occur on September 21, 2222. The Starfleet Battles game was published in 1979, with a license only covering the original series. It has since diverged into an entirely separate fictional universe, new additions to which continue to be published. It does not tie into the Gregorian calendar, instead using a year one of the invention of warp on Earth. Its version of the original series backstory is, Y1 a Euro warp drive is developed on Earth. Y4 a Euro Federation is formed by Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, Alpha Centauri, Y40 Y46 a Euro Romulan War. Y71 a Euro Starfleet is formed. Y126 a Euro the Constitution class is launched. Y154 a Euro 159 a Euro the events of the original series. See Starfleet Universe Timeline. TNG era and Okuda. Press materials for TNG suggested it was set in the 24th century, 78 years after the existing Star Trek, although the exact time frame had not yet been set in stone. The pilot had dialogue stating Data was part of the Starfleet class of 78. The pilot episode, Encounter at Farpoint, also has a cameo appearance by Leonard Bones McCoy, who is said to be 137. In the last episode of the first season, the year is firmly established by Data, as 2364. This marked the first time an explicit future calendar date had been attached to any Star Trek storyline, and allowed fans and writers to extrapolate further dates. For example, The established date implies McCoy was born around 2227, ruling out the spaceflight chronology-derived dating of the original series to the early 23rd century. A Star Trek chronology was published in 1993, written by production staff members Denise Okudla and Michael Okudla. A second edition was issued in 1996. Okudla originally drew up a timeline for internal use by writers, based on his own research and assumptions provided by Richard Arnold. The dates in the chronology are consistent with the earliest Star Trek, The Next Generation Technical Manual. It gives the following dates: Zefram Cochrane invents warp drive around 2061, the Romulan War takes place in the 2150s, the Federation is formed in 2161, after the Romulan War, on the basis that Balance of Terror says that it was an Earth-Romulan War, not a Federation-Romulan War. The first Constitution-class starship is launched in 2244, followed by the Enterprise in 2245. Kirk's 5-year mission lasts from 2264 to 2269, based on the assumption that the original series is set exactly 300 years after its original broadcast. Aired live-action Star Trek episodes are dated from 2266 to 2269. The chronology does not include the events of Star Trek, the animated series. This is in keeping also with Gene Roddenberry's concept that Star Trek's first season takes place after the mission has been underway for some time. An episode of Voyager Q2 aired after the chronology was published, established that Kirk's 5-year mission actually ended in 2270. The events of Star Trek, the motion picture take place in 2271, the Q2 dating for Kirk's 5-year mission, moves the first film to c. 2273. Numerous sources, including the chronology, postulate a second 5-year mission under now Admiral Kirk's command began soon after the events of the first movie. In part this is to take into account the unproduced revival series Star Trek, Phase 2. The events of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock take place in 2285. The Wrath of Khan is a sequel to the episode Space Seed, which Okudla dates to 2267. In Okudla's timeline there is a gap of 18 years rather than the 15 years established in dialogue. The film was released in 1982, 15 years after the episode's broadcast in 1967. A film begins on Kirk's birthday, which is semi-canonically established as March 22, the same as William Shatner. The events of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home take place in 2286, this places Star Trek III in late 2285, as Kirk states in his log that the Enterprise crew has been on Vulcan for 3 months since bringing Spock home. The events of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier take place in 2287, the events Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country take place in 2293, based on McCoy's statement that he had served on the Enterprise for 27 years, and his absence in Where No Man Has Gone Before. The Kirk-era part of Star Trek Generations is set 78 years before 2371, thus is set in 2293 and soon after Star Trek VI. The gap between 1986's Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, and the 1987 first season of The Next Generation is 78 years by this timeline, matching early press materials. There was a gap of 10 years between the broadcast of the last episode of TOS and the release of the motion picture. The film skirted round the fact the actors had aged, supposing that only 2.5 years had passed since the events of the TV show. For Star Trek II, it was decided to acknowledge the reality of the aging actors, both by setting the film some 15 years after Space Seed, and by having Kirk worry about getting old. Within the TNG era, episodes and films are easier to date. Star dates correspond exactly with seasons, with the first 2 digits of the star date representing the season number. Okudla assumes the start of a season is January 1 and the end of the season is December 31. The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager television series and movies have roughly followed real time, and are set around 377 years after their release. Since the chronology was published, it has been generally adhered to by the producers of the show. The film Star Trek, First Contact and prequel series Star Trek, Enterprise both revisit the early era. In First Contact, Zefram Cochrane is confirmed as having invented warp drive on Earth, but the date is moved forward slightly to 2063, and it is revealed that Earth's official first contact with an alien species, the Vulcans, took place immediately afterwards as a result of this. The dating of the final season of Star Trek, Voyager, however, has presented controversy. The standard assumption about star dates, as well as the regular correspondence between seasons and in-universe years, would place the entire season in the year 2377. The season begins with star date 54,014.4 and ends with 54,973.4. However, the episode Homestead features a celebration of the 315th anniversary of Zefram Cochrane's first contact with the Vulcans, which would set the episode on April 5, 2378. The fansite Memory Alpha thus places the final 8 episodes of the season in 2378, with other sources following suit. Enterprise is set in the 2150s, and ties into the Cochrane backstory. The show uses the Gregorian calendar instead of star dates, making tracking the dating easier. Its pilot, Broken Bow, depicts first contact with the Klingons occurring much earlier than the Okuda chronology anticipated. It shows the opening of the Romulan War and the start of a coalition between Earth, Vulcan, Anda and Teller in the 2150s. The date of the founding year of the Federation, 2161, was revealed in the 5th season TNG episode The Outcast, based on an early draft of the Okuda timeline. The final episode of Enterprise, These Are the Voyages, is consistent with the establishment of 2161 as the founding year for the Federation. No version of the chronology or the encyclopedia has been published since 1999. A 2006 book by Jeff Ayres contains a timeline which attempts to date all of the many Star Trek novels. This timeline has the motion picture in 2273, to account for the 2.5-year gap between the end date of 2270 established in Q2, and the events of the movie. The official website, StarTrek.com, still gives the date of that movie as 2271. Eugenics Wars and World War III. When the original series of Star Trek was produced, the 1990s were considered the distant future, and so various elements of the backstory to Star Trek are set in that era, particularly the Eugenics Wars. The references to the Eugenics Wars and to a nuclear war in the 21st century are somewhat contradictory. The episode Space Seed establishes the Eugenics Wars, and has them lasting from 1992 to 1996. The Eugenics Wars are described as a global conflict in which the progeny of a human genetic engineering project, most notably Khan Nawani and Singh, established themselves as Supermen and attempted world domination. Spock calls them your last so-called World War, and McCoy identifies this with the Eugenics Wars. In the episode Bread and Circuses, Spock gives a death toll for World War III of 37 million. The episode The Savage Curtain features a Colonel Green, who led a genocidal war in the 21st century. The TNG episode Encounter at Farpoint further establishes a post-atomic horror on Earth in 2079. The Star Trek Concordance identifies the Bread and Circuses figure as the death toll for a nuclear World War III, in the mid-21st century. Star Trek First Contact firmly establishes World War III ended, after a nuclear exchange, in 2053, but with a body count of 600 million. A figure of Colonel Green is elaborated on in Star Trek Enterprise. First Contact also deliberately describes the warring parties in World War III as factions, not nations per se. The Voyager episode Futures End saw the Voyager crew time travel to Los Angeles in 1996, which, as the encyclopedia notes, seems entirely unaffected by the Eugenics Wars, which ended that year. The episode acknowledges the issue only by featuring a model of Khan's DY-100 class ship on a 1996 desk. Khan's spaceship is another anomaly for the timeline, which has a variety of long-lost spaceships being launched between 1980 and 2100, with inconsistent levels of technology. A reference in the Deep Space Nine episode Dr. Bashir, one presume, suggests that the Eugenic Wars instead took place in the 22nd century. According to writer Ronald D. Moore, This was not an attempt at a retcon, but a mistake. When writing the episode, he recalled the already questionable 2 centuries ago line from Space Seed, and forgot that DS9 takes place over 100 years later. Greg Cox's 2-book series The Eugenics Wars, The Rise and Fall of Khan Nowanian Singh develops the idea of the eugenics wars in the context of real-life history by representing it as a secret history, and that the truth behind the various civil wars and conflicts in the 1990s was not generally known. Cochrane, in the episode Metamorphosis, it is stated that Sven Cochrane of Alpha Centauri, the discoverer of the space warp, disappeared 150 years ago, at the age of 87. Given Okuda's date of 2267 for that episode, this puts Cochrane's disappearance in 2117 and birth in 2030. 1980s spin-off material such as the Star Trek spaceflight chronology posit that Cochrane was from Alpha Centauri originally, and that a sub-warp ship, the UNSS Icarus, arrived at Alpha Centauri in 2048 to find he had discovered the theory behind warp drive. The Icarus then relayed its findings back to Earth. The first prototype warp ship was launched in 2055. The Star Trek chronology does not hold with this theory, and asserts that Cochrane was an Earth native, who moved to Alpha Centauri later in life. The first edition chronology notes that Cochrane's invention of warp drive must have been at least 200 years before, where no man has gone before, and suggests a date of 2061, noting that Cochrane would be 31 that year. The movie Star Trek: First Contact prominently features Cochrane's first successful warp flight. The film is set in 2063, 2 years after the chronology's suggestions, and therefore by the timeline Cochrane is 33. The actor who played Cochrane in that movie, James Cromwell, was 56 at the time of the film's release. The encyclopedia notes the age issue, and claims that the Cromwell Cochrane had suffered from radiation poisoning, causing his aged appearance. Enterprise pins down Cochrane's disappearance to 2119, making Cochrane instead 31 at the time of first contact. Notes. External links: Memory Alpha, The Star Trek Key, Category Timeline.